Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A very warm welcome to you all. We have come to the session 2 of Ram Swamiji's management lessons from Bhagavad Gita. We will start with a small prayer. Sarvatma sarvadrugyosau sarvadhyasa nirasakrita satatam sannidhattam me hridaye paramashivaha. Viewers, if you have any questions, please post them in Q&A box and not in chat box. Ramaswamiji will be taking up towards the end of the session. Ramaswamiji, please start your session.
Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Hari Om to all. In this series of sessions, we are in the second session today, and the topic chosen is about self-control. If you analyze the life carefully, it presents a picture of contradictions. These are not real contradictions, but they appear to be contradictions, apparent contradictions. Best of the human intellects can also not fathom as to why it is like that, but the fact is that they are like that. They appear like that. For example, a tiger, which is a prey, which is a predator, which is trying to catch its prey. The tiger is given all facilities by the nature. It is designed in such a way that everything is conducive for it to catch the prey. Like half a ton animal can jump from a tree and you will not even realize how softly it lands. It has been given claws that can tear open even the thickest of skins. Like that is the tiger design. But the contradiction is that we see on the other side, the prey is also given all the designs that it can escape the predator. The deer is very spotted and it gets camouflaged in the forest that you cannot easily spot it. And with a heavy body, they are given legs that can carry them fast also. So like that, you don't understand on whose side is the creator as it is. A person who is really wanting to do good to you, who is a benefactor, he appears to be harsh in his outlook towards you. For example, if you go back to your own childhood, a strict teacher or your own father, when he was not allowing certain things to you, you had extreme sort of hatred for them, or you would get angry at that point of time. But it is due to their strict discipline at that point of time, we say that we were saved from certain things, but we realize that only when we come out of our childhood or when we grow sufficiently enough to understand it. On the other hand, one who is smiling and one who is soft towards you, one who is nice towards you, may turn out to be a malefactor. See, he may appear like a friend. I'm not putting any intention on that person. Most of us start this habit of smoking or drinking, not out of your taste for it, but because some friend introduced you to it. And that friend said, there's nothing wrong about it. Why don't you try? But he is not really wanting to spoil you. He is not having any evil intention. But his introduction to these habits has taken you to such an extent that you find it very difficult to leave that habit later on. So one who does harm to you appears smiling. One who does good to you appears harsh. This is the contradiction. We see again in this world, there are generally two categories of people. One set of people are very prosperous and very productive and very active. In a way, a good portion of the Western countries fall into this category. But from their own admission, they have lost the peace of mind. The indicators such as divorce rates and crime rates are proof for this. On the other hand, we still see in some other places, particularly in eastern countries, in villages, in India also, even now, there is a lot of peace. There is a lot of genuine smile and warmth. But there is no productivity, there is no activity. So, where there is peace, there is no prosperity and productivity. Where there is action and productivity, there is no peace. This is not a law, but this seems to be a general observation that we see here. That is a contradiction. Similarly, we touched upon this in the morning that it is the human being who is in the highest rung of the spiritual evolution or the evolution ladder. But it is he who needs education as to how to lead one's life. One of the very practical advices that Swamiji gives, that if you want to learn spirituality, Vedanta, one of the most recommended or best channels in TV is to watch the Animal Planet or Discovery, which talks shows how nature functions. So in the Animal Planet, we see that when a calf is born, within 45 minutes, it is able to suckle milk from the mother by itself, and it is able to walk and jump here and there. Whatever is required for the calf to live a life is by and large given at birth. It is sort of complete in its evolution as that species, as that animal. But a human baby is probably the most stupid of all creatures when it is born. The human baby cannot defend itself even against a mosquito. Left to itself, it may even die. The mother has to take feed, etc. But the human baby can get educated later on, and then he can even rule the universe. To that extent, he can grow. But for the animal, it is limited in its expression, limited in its way of living, that it is sort of computerized. So animals don't need knowledge as to how to lead their life. They are, as I said, perfected at birth. And the sense of proportion and the sense of control is also inbuilt in them. When a dog is having some issue or problem with the stomach, it will not eat. But a human being is not like that. When you have problem with the stomach, if somebody offers you sweet also, you are tempted to take it and eat it. Or you don't want to break his heart, and for that you will take it and eat it. So the eating habits and mating habits are all perfectly disciplined in animals. For us, it is not so. And that is the point that we need to think about. Why is it that nature, or if you want to say God, whoever has made this structure, this type of a design, why has he kept it like that? It is, as I said, you are also given, like it is like, the reason is like this. When a child is growing, all the nature of all the needs of the child is taken care by the father. He need not worry about spending, he need not worry about clothes, he need not worry about food, everything is provided to him. But let us say at the age of 21 or so, the father says, I have set up this for you, I have put so much money into your bank, and I am handing over the checkbook to you. From now on, you better take care of your needs. He transfers the responsibility because you are now a grown-up adult. If that person does not handle it properly, he will lose the money. If he handles it properly, he can grow it to many more millions and billions also. But now the control is sort of in his hands. That is how the father has handed over. It's exactly like that. From the lower levels of evolution, when you come to the highest level and you take the human form, the supreme, whoever it is, he has handed over the charge to you and says, from now on, you take care. You can go to the depth of devolution or further into the state of evolution to reach the state of godhood in this lifetime also. I give you that choice for you. It is up to you. That choice is called as the intellect. So a sense of ego which is there, which takes you away from the away from the control and all other discipline, is also very much active in the human being. On the other side, to balance it, a sense of viveka or buddhi or that intellect is given, where you can think and choose the right actions also. And that is why we need control. We need knowledge as to how to control. We need to develop that intellect to control the mind, etc. All this is required for a human being. As human beings, we have three distinct equipments: the external body, and then in the inner equipments, we have the mind and the intellect. I am talking about it functionally. So body, mind, and intellect are the three equipments that we have. Mind is the seat of emotions, and intellect is the seat of thinking. Now, if you are able to look at this structure of the human being from a different angle, these three equipments can be classified into three sets of organs here. The three sets of organs are, there is this body which has 5 organs of perception and 5 organs of action. The 5 organs of perceptions are called as Jnana Indriyas. Jnana Indriyas are the organs of perception. They are called Jnana Indriyas because the knowledge of the world comes to you through them. So these are the eyes, ears, nose, tongue and skin. And then the body also have five organs of action, karma indriyas. Of course, indriya technically belongs to the subtle body, but the expression of which is in the gross body. So you can take it that way. The 5 organs of actions are the speech, the limbs, hands, the legs, and the genital organs and the organ of evacuation. So these 5 are the organs of action, karma indriyas. And then the mind and intellect can be collectively taken as the inner equipment. These set of equipments constantly make you transact with the world. So constantly there is a traffic that is happening. This traffic can be called as 3R traffic. The 3R traffic, the 3R here stands for receipt, reaction, and response. Receipt of the stimuli comes from the world into you through the organs of perception. Okay, so through the eyes the sight comes, through the tongue the taste comes, through the ears the sound comes. Like that, there is a receipt of stimuli from the world through the organs of perception. And based on that, there is a reaction within you, and that reaction is happening based on your desires, based on your thoughts, based on your inclinations, your tendencies, and all the reaction happens at the realm of the inner personality, which is the mind and intellect. Based on the reaction, you are giving back response to the world, and that is through the organs of action. Of course, the response need not be always as a vehement action. Sometimes you can keep quiet. That is also a response. But generally, when you contact the world, you are doing that with the organs of action. Say, for example, you open the newspaper and you see suddenly that there is going to be, okay, election dates are announced. Now, that is a stimuli that enters you through the eyes. If you are interested in politics and you are also wanting to vote, etc., immediately you are reacting, what is the date in my constituency? Who should I vote for? Who is the candidate? Or various reactions that are happening within your system. Should I take, or election, there will be holiday, I need not vote. Should I go out of Calcutta? Or who should I vote? How can I influence other people to vote? Like that, various reactions are happening at the mind and intellect level, based on which the response can be that you call a person and discuss, or you mark the date in the calendar, or you say that I will book a ticket on that day and go somewhere outside Calcutta. It can be anything. That response is happening at the level of the organs of action. If a person is not having too many areas of interest. In other words, technically, if he is having only very few desires that he is operating at a very evolved level, the receipts can come in and die within himself. There will not be much of reaction. So therefore, his organs of actions are completely automatically sort of restrained. He's operating at a different level. But for most of us, there is this constant receipt reaction response that's happening, and we have lot of desires, lot of areas of interest within us. Therefore, we tend to react with the world for each and every aspect that is there. Now, this system that is functioning within us actually resembles a factory or an office. So in an office, a clerk is there and a manager is there. It is the clerk who receives the post or the mails that come. It is his duty to submit to the manager. The manager reads what it is and then he understands what it is and pens a response. That response can be typed out by the clerk again and dispatched. This is a good office, ideal office, then that office will be running smoothly. If the manager is sleeping, or if the manager is weak, or if the manager is not there, any mail that comes, the clerk himself opens, he decides something based on his whim or fancy, and he gives out a response on his own, that office is sooner or later going to shut down. Now, it is exactly like that. The intellect and the mind are equivalent of the manager and the clerk in our system. Any receipt that comes into our system, the mind should submit it to the intellect, and intellect should draft the response, and that response will be ideal response. It is the thought out response. It is the correct response. But if the intellect is not strong, if the intellect is not available, or if the intellect is sleeping, then the mind reacts by itself and it sends out a response based on its whims and fancies. This system will not sustain for long. It will collapse. So in this diagram, we see that receipt and response. In this right side, it is the world. From the world, the stimuli come, and there's a gap between mind and intellect. In fact, the mind and intellect must be as close as possible so that they are integrated. An integrated mind and intellect is where the mind is under the perfect control of intellect. Like that it is. The more the ego a person has, more is this gap, and that is going to be a disaster. But ideally, the mind should receive the stimuli, but the responses based on the choice of the intellect must be the executing force. And then you can send back that response. Exactly, this is what functions at the level of a factory also, that raw material is fed on one side, and there is a machinery which processes the raw material, and then the finished product come on the other side. If you want that factory to run smoothly and the system and the product that you produce has to be good, then you must pay attention to all the three stages. You have to be very careful about what is the raw material that is being fed. You must constantly make sure that the machinery is functioning properly and it is maintained at optimum condition. Overhauling of the machine is required from time to time. And then when it is done, obviously the finished product will be good, but still it is in our own benefit that you check the finished product from time to time, what is known as quality control. Exactly like that. If we want to evolve as individuals spiritually, we need to examine from time to time what is the quality of our receipt, what is the method of our reaction, and how does our mind and intellect function, introspection with reference to that. And again, when the action is let out, viewing it from time to time as to what reaction it further produces in you so that you can do minor and subtle corrections in that also. But the whole process, if you ask, begins with the raw material only. Because however much great your machinery is, and however much your quality control system is also, if the raw material is going to be of very poor quality, nothing can be done about it. So the whole process starts with having an effective control of the stimuli that enters you. That is where it begins. If you have a house, let us say, you are gone out of the house, and in your absence there has been heavy rain, and in the heavy rain the drainage pipe which is there leading the water from the house to outside, let us say, that is clogged. And what has happened, by some force of the water from outside also, and adding to that this clog, the water from outside has started seeping into your room, dirty water, and it is now continuously flowing in. Even after the rain has stopped, now the seepage of water is still there, and that is the time you enter the house and see that it is in a big mess. Obviously you need to clean up everything now. So before you even start clearing up the system, the first thing that you need to do is that seepage of water which is coming in now, you have to put a stop there, so that there is no further inflow of dirt. And once that is secured, then you can plan about how to clear the existing mess. It is exactly like that. We need to clear up the existing mess within our system, which has been collected over maybe past janmas. We do not know, so much long time it has been there, and we are given a conscious life for as a human birth to do this. But even as we do this, first and foremost thing is to have a check at the level where the inflow is going to enter our system. That is why it is recommended that we always maintain a satsang. Satsang is where conducive stimuli will enter your system. It is, of course, it is holy people, good people, and that is the real and essential meaning, but it applies at all levels also. What is the type of food you eat? What is the type of music you listen to? Even now, as we enter the social media, which is an integral part of our life, what is the stimuli that you get there from? So it is very important that you maintain a proper association at all levels of your personality. And that is where self-control is important for us. Self-control essentially, of course, control can be at all levels, but essentially it is talking about control at the level of the senses. So if you are able to filter the stimuli at the stimuli level itself, then you are doing a lot of good, and then the reaction and response part becomes much more easier. And that is why self-control is emphasized as a very, very, very important aspect of the spiritual sadhana. See, sometimes the modern gurus and acharyas also, it is not to talk anything about them, that will be blasphemy, but the point is, even sometimes in the over enthusiasm we talk about that we should only keep our mind under control and it should be pure. It does not matter what you do at the external level, you can be amidst everywhere. Like that, they talk about the essential state where you should be by practicing all these things. But you cannot take it for granted that I can do anything and everything at the sense level, but ultimately my mind has to be pure. It doesn't work like that. So we have to exercise a proper restraint and proper control at the level of the senses. Now, according to the law of demand and supply, it is said that the disease for this is twofold in nature. There are two types of diseases that operate. One we can call adhyatmic, or the female disease, which is internal to us. And then there is adhibhautik, which is male, which is external to us. The external or the male disease refers to all the temptations that are there, all the sense objects that are there, which is always trying to pull you. The female disease refers to all the weakness that is there, all the urge that we feel inside, all our taste and passions that is actually pushing us. So there is constantly both these things operate, and there is a push and the pull. According to the law of demand and supply, it is the female that attracts the male. So you cannot say that I really want to control myself, but what to do? These external things are there in my environment and they are tempting me. Vedanta does not accept the basic premise of it. There is no doubt the external things can tempt you, but if there is going to be a basic demand within you, only then there is going to be a supply in your environment from outside. If your mind seeks Scotch whiskey, only then the Scotch bottles even may start moving from Scotland. Like that it is. So, if you want to correct the situation, if you understand and want to correct the situation, it is just not enough if you merely correct the external circumstance. See, suppose you say, I'm being tempted by all these things, therefore let me leave this environment and go somewhere else. Let me go to Himalayas. Let me go somewhere else. Okay. Even temporarily, there may not be conducive environment, so you may feel somewhat at rest, but you have not attended to the basic root cause which is there within you, which is the female disease inside. So when a conducive environment later on presents itself, it is going to be automatically attracted again. So Vedanta says it is okay for you to deal with the external situation, but first and foremost attend to the internal situation. If you are able to get rid of that completely, then you will not be tempted by anything from outside. Then you may reach a state of Vivekananda or Gautama Buddha or whoever the great masters, put them in any circumstances, they will not be bothered at all. In Bhajagovindam, a verse says, Yogaratova, Bogaratova, Sangaratova, Sangavihinaha, Yasya Brahmani Ramate Chittam. So once you get into that state of Brahmani Ramate Chittam, that your mind is always reveling in the thought of Brahman, you will be Nandati, Nandati, Nandati. You will be happy at all times. It really does not matter whether you are placed in crowd, whether you are placed alone, whether you are solitary, whether you are in spiritual practice, whether you are in worldly practice. All this really does not matter. But it is a state that has been achieved through hard practice. But till you reach that state, you need to be extremely cautious and conscious of your effort to reach that state. And that is where self-control comes in. Before we understand how does this even self-control operate and how we have to practice it, we have to understand, first of all, the devastating influence of the senses. Each and every one of the senses that we have are extremely powerful. In Kathopanishad, the example of the chariot is given, which you can picturize that way. As the Bhagavad Gita picture, there's always given as Arjuna is the Rathi, the individual, and the Krishna is Sarathi. Of course, it is a 4-horse chariot. Imagine it to be with 5 horses. The 5 horses are connected to that rein, and that reins are held strongly by Krishna. And such a chariot is safe. Each of these 5 horses are very powerful. So if you allow that horses to go by themselves, they will go in all 5 directions. That chariot is going to collapse. So the chariot is your body. The charioteer is the intellect. The rider is the ego, the individual. The reins is the mind, and the 5 horses are the 5 senses. These 5 senses yoked to that mind, if it is held firmly by the intellect, your body can complete its course of action properly. Otherwise, you are waiting for accidents to happen in your life. So we have to understand the devastating influence of the senses. In the morning, when we talked about the 62 and 63 verse of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, the entire portion is sort of dedicated to this only. Verses from 61 to 68 is a glorious portion which talks about the influence of the senses and how, what are the things that it will do and how one must self-control. All this is completely packed in that portion. What does this sense do is that, see, constantly there is this tug of war happening between us and the world. Our life is a game between the individual and the world, you and the world. There's a sport that is going on. And this, tug of war is where there is a rope and each team has strong members and they are trying to pull each other to the other side. So, and there might be a very fat person in the end of each team, and he's like the sort of captain or commander, like that it is. Exactly like that, constantly there is a tug of war happening between individual and the world. From the side of the individual, you have the intellect, you have the mind, you have the senses, and this forms one team on one side. On the other side, there is the world, and you have the thoughts that correspond to intellect, the emotions that correspond to mind, and the sense objects that correspond to the senses. So constantly there is a push and pull that is always going on. If you tend to lose yourself here, who is the first victim is that the senses fall. Okay? It is the senses that fall first because that is what is being exposed to the world first. Once the senses lose themselves, meaning you lose completely your self-control, it does not end there. The senses pull the mind away. So the second one to fall is the mind. The senses pull the mind away. And then this he mentions in the 61st verse, 60th verse, I think. Then he gives a series of verses to explain the importance of intellect. And in the 67th or 68th verse, he says, the mind doesn't keep quiet. Tadasya harati prajnam vayur navamivambasi. A boat that is there in the ocean, rudderless, without the captain, how it is in the mercy of the wind that it will be carried away. Like that, the mind which has fallen pulls the intellect also away. Tadasya harati prajnam. A wise person also, his intellect gets carried away. So, in the process, the intellect also gets carried away. Finally, the individual perishes. He collapses. Now, this tug of war, it all starts with the power of senses. It is the senses that lose themselves first. If you understand this carefully, you will be able to relate to this from the symbolic point of view as to what happened in the Sabha in Mahabharata. 5 Pandava brothers yoked to one Draupadi can be symbolically taken as the 5 senses yoked to the mind. And once they are tempted, they lose themselves one by one. Finally, all of them become slaves. Then they don't keep quiet. They gamble with Draupadi. So, this senses pull the mind away. Of course, that can be further explained to what is the redemption there. We are not going into it now, but this is what it is. That Draupadi is yoked to these 5 husbands. All of them are sitting there helplessly when she is being disrobed there. It is exactly like that. When your senses have completely lost and when the mind is now completely being carried away, your inner personality is as though taken away. The senses cannot do anything. They just cannot do anything. They will helplessly watch. That's what it is. Okay. Senses have that power. They have power here. I'm using that way that they have the power finally to lose themselves and then they drag the entire personality along with them. A person says that I can control myself at any cost. It really does not matter. It is just not possible. How do we exercise self-control? Because they are very powerful. Once you confront the sense objects, you lose half your power. We'll come back to this point as we see how to redeem ourselves. But this is the power of the senses. The power of the senses is that do not poo-poo it. Do not take it for lightly. Once they get caught in something, they have the power. They will draw themselves into it and finally draw the whole personality into it. And then Even if you are generally okay, basically all the persons are controlled at the level of 4, 3, or at least, yeah, sometimes 4 senses. But they will have definitely weakness in at least one sense. And that is enough to actually cause your destruction. If even one window is open for you, that is enough. The thief comes through that window, then he burgles the whole house. It is like that. Shankaracharya in Viveka Chudamani is talking about how one weakness is enough to cause destruction of a particular creature. So he talks about the weakness of senses. First, he talks about the moth. Moth has a weakness for sight. So the moth is always attracted to the candle or the source of light. Irresistibly, it goes there. It loses its wings. With the other wing, it will go there. It loses both the wings. It will crawl up the candle till it burns itself because it has a weakness for the sight. So irresistibly, it is drawn to fire. So weakness of sight is there, and that causes the death of the moth. Then he talks about deer. Deer has a weakness for sound. In order to catch the deer or shoot the deer, what they do is that it doesn't easily come out into the open. So they wait and the hunters play bass music, a sort of a Grameen music. I do not know the exact name. That is how it is spelled. I do not know why it coincides with the Grammy Awards, which is given for the music. Of course, we should not talk ill about any music, whether it's Western or Indian. But the point is, Western classical music and all, whether it gets that award, I really do not know. In that sort of a music it is. And the deer has a weakness for the ear. It gets attracted towards that. Once the sound comes, the deer comes out into the open and it is searching for it. Then it is either shot or it is caught. So that is the weakness for the sound that is causing its devastation. Then you have the fish, which has a weakness for tongue, taste. Of course, you may argue fish may not have tongue, but it's always wanting to eat something. And even in aquarium, you can see that it's like that. So the fisherman puts a bait in the angle, and when he throws in, the fish falls for it. And it is losing its life. It is caught. It cannot come out. It catches in such a way that it is hooked onto it. The fish has a weakness for the taste and it dies because of it. You have the elephant, which has the weakness for touch, skin. A big pit is there, and in the mating season, it runs helter-skelter. It falls into the pit. It is narrow in the bottom and broad in the top, and then they bring a trained female elephant. The first thing they make it touch, and in that touch, it sort of gives out a cry that I am your slave, please save me from here. A big elephant which can take care of hundreds of humans becomes a slave of a human being because of its weakness for touch. The touch is very important for the elephant. It loses itself completely in that. And then finally, he talks about bee. Bee has a weakness for smell. So in search of that smell, it enters the flower, and then slowly the flower closes and the bee is trapped inside. It is dead. Probably he leaves us with this question that any one sense is enough to cause your destruction. Oh man, what is your chance? Because you have all the 5 weaknesses. This is how we have to understand the power of the senses. So first, before we even attempt to understand what is self-control and how should we practice it, unless otherwise we understand the devastating influence of it, why would we even attempt it? We don't even bother about it, and we say, then I can take care. No, it is not so. And particularly for a person, all this applies particularly for a person who wants to have a life of control and move ahead in spiritual paths. So you need to otherwise all the effort that you put in the morning will be oozed out through this sense activities in the evening. Like that it is. It will become self-cancelling activity and we will not proceed anywhere. So self-control is definitely a vital aspect to begin with in the sadhana, and then once you become controlled at the sense level, then the higher and greater levels and at the subtler levels you can exercise control. If we are not able to do it at this body level, at the physical level, it becomes much more difficult for us to do it at the inner level and finer dirts inside that. Now, how do we resolve this? The basic formula is that the sense objects turn away from an abstinent person. This is what we started the talk by saying, that it is according to your demand that the supply appears in your environment. Unless otherwise you show a strong will for exercising self-control, all this is not going to work at all. So you have to have that a stance that you will abstain and you will have control over yourself. This is a strong message that you need to say for yourself. Only then the other things will work. So the basic requirement here is that the mind is well resolved that I must become the master. See, self-control is not self-denial. Maybe if you have time, we will see it in detail later. You need to exercise control. Brahmacharya is also not just abstinence from certain things. It is to have the sense objects, and your senses should not dictate terms to you. They must be at your control. When you want to do something, you must be able to do it. So therefore, the mind must be well resolved that I must take charge and I must take control. If this sort of a pratignya or vow is not there within you, it is not going to work. You see, you may feel sometimes very bad about what has happened, and you say, you know, like a New Year resolution, I must get up and do my morning exercises from this year, 2021 resolution, 2022. See, a few days later, now April 1 is going to come. April 1 is supposed to be Fool's Day. So a person asked, what is the difference between April 1 and January 1? He said, in April 1, you fool others. On January 1, you take resolution and fool yourself. This year I'll do this, and this year I'll do that. And 4 or 5 days you'll do, and afterwards you won't do. So we are not talking about certain influence-based, haphazard sort of resolutions. Once you understand deeply what is the devastating influence of senses and why I should train myself to have self-control and move ahead in the path of spiritual evolution, if all those thoughts are not, at least to some extent, deeply established in us, this sort of a firm resolution will not come. And we are talking about that person who is genuinely interested. His mind must be well resolved that I need to take charge and I need to exercise control over my senses. And then there must be a period of initial abstinence. If a person is addicted to alcohol, daily at 6 o'clock, the bell rings and he is there in the club with his friends. It is not that he does not know the ill effects of alcohol. He might give even a better lecture on the ill effects of alcohol than the doctor, because he has both the knowledge and the experience also. And in the house, when he goes and when the parents give advice to him and the wife is crying to him, he really feels. It is not that he doesn't understand. But next day when the 6 o'clock happens, he automatically goes there. That is how it is. Therefore, if you are firmly resolved that there must be an initial abstinence. So why there must be an initial physical abstinence is that when you confront a sense object, you lose half your power to it. This is in one way you can take as the symbolism of Rama slaying Vali in Ramayana. Vali has a peculiar boon. Anybody who comes in front of Vali, he has half their power. So even if you are more powerful than Vali, when you call him to fight, you will lose half your power to him, and he will be anyway stronger than you. Even if you are 100 and he is 1, he will become 51. You will become 50. He is stronger than you in any case, so you cannot defeat Vali. So Rama, as though hiding behind and shooting, is that you should not directly confront Vali, you must shoot from behind. It is an education for us that do not confront the sense objects directly. Don't sit in front of TV and say that let the match go on, but I will read. You know, the moment you sit in front of TV, the TV takes half your power away. You just then cannot concentrate. Don't say that it is all cheating yourself. That's all it is. So exactly like that, when this person, if he has genuinely decided to give up alcohol, all that is the first condition, that your mind is well resolved, then he must not go to the bar. He must say no to that physical environment which is producing this. There will be definitely a tough phase where, because your body is also used to it, there will be some itch and other thing, but that is a price that you need to pay initially. So there must be an abstinence by which you are physically away from it. But then if you are sitting down in your place and constantly thinking of it again and again, it is going to be a mental torture also. Therefore, that abstinence you have to substitute with higher knowledge. See, even this class here, suppose you might have gone outside for Saturday for a party, that you have abstained yourself by not going there, but that must be employed properly in intake of knowledge. Like that it is. So when you say 3 years, I am going to invest in myself, like we have a course in academy, that 3 years is like an abstinence from the society, from whatever you are doing, but that time must be employed properly to gain that knowledge and develop that intellect. So you have to substitute with knowledge. So with little abstinence, you are able to gain little knowledge. That knowledge gives you more power to abstain further. That abstinence gives you chance to gain more knowledge. Therefore, what happens is that there is a continuous cycle of growth. Chapter 3, verse 43 says, Bhagavad Gita, Evam buddhe param buddhva samstabhyatmanam atmana. So you have to use these two as the pedals of the cycle. One goes up and comes down and it helps the other, like that it is. So there must be this intelligent abstinence and provision of knowledge for you to fortify yourself. It is a matter of time before you will be able to have control of yourself. Even then, the relish still lingers, because the vasanas that has been ingrained in you is so powerful. Maybe we are carrying it for janmas. It is not so easy. And so, in fact, when Swamiji sometimes gives advice, he is not generally a counselor or somebody, but if somebody comes with a specific problem, he has to handle it case by case and give specific solutions for them. So when a person really wanted to leave alcohol or leave cigarette, and he gives a formula as this. After this month, this will happen. After this week, this will happen. At that time, what you should do, like that and all. But at any point of time, don't take the stance that now I can control. See, last 6 months, I have not smoked at all. Now, even if I smoke once, what will happen? That sort of a stance never take, because it may again lead you to a side. So there has to be a proper way and proper guidance has to be there. But the relish is very powerful. And that relish will go only upon seeing the Supreme, says Gita. So one need not worry. If you are having fair control and you are intensifying your sadhana, you are trying to find now the relish somewhere else. If you are getting used to that type of a relish, this relish should automatically go. Right. Now, there are two aspects of self-control. The first aspect of self-control is that our actions that are done at the level of the body cannot do actions by itself. The body has to be either prompted by the mind or the intellect. The mind, when it prompts the body to action, it is based on likes and dislikes. So your actions, it is recommended that they are not based on merely your likes and dislikes, but based on your thinking, the obligation. Then only you will be doing the duty-bound correct action. But the likes and dislikes are so powerful that we gather from the early childhood, and it is fed upon by our so-called well-wishers. It becomes like a motor in our system. It becomes extremely difficult to get rid of it. And then it becomes the motor. Therefore, the first aspect of self-control is that let not the likes and dislikes decide your action. It is your intellect which should decide the action. This is first aspect of self-control. The second aspect of self-control is, okay, I will not initiate the action based on my likes and dislikes. I am acting based on my obligations. But even as I'm doing my obligations, I encounter certain experiences from where I can gather fresh likes and dislikes. Now, how does it happen? Let us see how the sense traffic functions here. See, imagine this is the mind. The mind has the sense centers. It's called the Indriya. So 5 sense centers correspond to the 5 sense organs. And then there are these 5 sense objects in the world: O1, O2, O3, O4, and O5. They respectively represent the sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And there are these external organs within you through which this traffic happens. The sight enters through your eye and then reaches the sense center. The sound reaches the sense center through the ear. Similarly, smell through the nose. Taste through the tongue and reaches its respective sense center. Similarly, touch through the skin. A perception is completed only when the stimuli reaches the sense center. That is why we say there's a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing means the sound is coming, but when are you listening? Only when it reaches your mind. So your eyes might be sometimes open. Even for some people, while they are sleeping, the eyes is open, but they are not registering any perception. Why are they not registering any perception? Because the mind is not available. Therefore, for your sense perception to be complete, mind must be available, and particularly in that sense center, when it gets deposited, you will be able to complete that perception. Now, you have not, what happens is, let us say, for example, there's a place where I go for a talk, and that is based on my obligation, because that is what I think is the right thing to do. But along that, I might encounter various experiences. Somebody has called me for a lunch and they are giving me a new sweet. I have not encountered that sweet at all before. And I just eat that sweet. It is very nice. It's very nice, and it's okay. It's okay to eat that sweet. It's very nice. If you forget about that, then there's no problem at all. Next day also somebody else calls you for lunch, and incidentally they serve the same sweet and it's very nice. Now I ask, what is that sweet's name, etc. They say it's a new type of sandesh, something like that they say. And then what happens is that the perception is over, but maybe in the night or so, I'm thinking about that. It's so nice, that sweet was. Third day, some other lunch, I go, I look forward to that sweet now. What has happened? Actually, if I had forgotten that perception, with that perception, nothing would have happened. But the mind has a tendency to linger on that perception. Like how a cow is cut chewing. Cut chewing is it eats the grass in the day, and in the night it brings out and keeps on chewing it. Like that, once I finish that sense perception, I bring it up again and again and do this cut chewing at the level of the mind. It is called as lingering. Then what happens is that around the sense center, I am causing some ripples. And fourth day also, before that, it becomes some sort of impression in me. And then I'm now looking forward to that sweet. Then when I go back to my city, I'm saying, that sweet, can I order here, or can I make it come from Calcutta? Something like that I may say. All this while, I did not have the taste for the sweet, but in this experience, because I have not checked my perception, which continued after that in the form of lingering, I have created a fresh light now. And that is how fresh vasanas are in fact created. So what really enhances your desire is not your experience with the sweet at the physical level. It is your lingering at the mental level. So here comes the second aspect of self-control, that let not your actions generate fresh like or dislike also. So there are two aspects of self-control here. One aspect we said is let not the likes and dislikes initiate fresh actions. Second is let not the actions deposit fresh likes and dislikes. End perception with perception. This is the life of Krishna. When he was with gopis, he was playing with gopis. When he was playing flute, he was playing flute. When he left Vrindavan, he left everything. Whatever he was doing in Dwaraka, there is never a lingering aspect in him. Therefore, that such a person is able to remain happy, and he is able to keep everybody happy around him. Now, that does not mean that you go from enjoyment to enjoyment and, we are not at the level of Krishna. What I'm trying to say in this example is that there should not be any lingering at all. Why does that lingering happen? That lingering happens because the mind falsely believes that the pleasure is in that experience. That is the false notion. The false notion is that it believes that it is in the experience, it is in that object, and then it is seeking for that object. In reality, the pleasure is within you. The source is within you. It is through the sense organs that the light is thrown out and that light falls on the outside objects. And you believe that the light is there in the object outside. And this is a very, very subtle point. You need to just gulp it now, but think about it deeply. Swamiji has given a brilliant example to corroborate this. At least that example we must understand. A person studies a book under moonlight and he believes that moon has light. Okay. And you as a science student know that moon does not have light of its own. Moon is reflecting sun's light. Now, if you try to educate that person on this point, he will not understand at all. There's no chance for him to understand. Not only that, he will say, that is my personal experience. I am having the book here. I am reading. Here is a moon which is giving light. Why are you complicating the issue? Why do you bring sun? Where is the sun now in the night? Where is the sun first of all? And you are saying sun is somewhere and that sunlight is there hitting the moon and that is sunlight is yellow or golden in color. Look at the moonlight. It is white and silvery in color. What is the connection? You just cannot prove anything to him. But the truth is that moon does not have light. It is exactly like that. It is the Atma which is the source of pleasure. It is the Atma that throws the light through the sense organs and through it, it falls on the objects. You make that sweet tasty actually, and then you believe that sweet is tasty and you believe that is the pleasure there. A bird is there within the cage. There is a light in the middle of the cage. The bird is not looking at the light. Think about it, because it is looking through the holes of the cage outside. Through the hole, the light falls outside and the bird believes that the light is outside. All that the bird needs to do is turn inside. That's all. It has to turn that way and it will find the source of the light. It is exactly like that. The source of the pleasure is within you, and this is the truth. But it is impossible to even convey this at the level of the intellect. Just give a benefit of doubt to understand this concept. That's all we can say. The truth is that it is the source of the pleasure is within you at the level of the Atma only. And that lends a vicarious pleasure through which you enjoy these sense objects. So therefore, even if you say there's no harm in experiencing this, fine, but you need to just end that perception with perception and not carry on forward to lingering, for which a strong thought has to be there that the real source is not there in the sense object. It is there within you. These two types of self-control is what is given in chapter 2, verse 64. Raga dvesha viyuktaistu vishayan indriyescharan atmavashyai vidheyatma prasadam adhigacchati. But the self-controlled man, free from likes and dislikes, moving among objects with his senses under control, attains peace. It's a very subtle verse. Swamiji says there are certain verses where you need to pause and understand. And one of the clues is that certain things are repeated in a different form. And that is why chapter 2, verse 53 is one of the outstanding interpretation of our Swamiji. Like that it is here. Why should a self-controlled man practice self-control? Atma Vashya is also given, Vidheyatma is also given. So why should a self-controlled man control his senses? Because he is talking about two types of self-control. Now what happens when you don't practice self-control is that you tend to lose the pleasure content in the object. See, even assuming from a very layman point of view, you don't bring in Atma, Brahma Vidya, Atma Vidya, Bhagavad Gita, self-control, all this is too much. Why do you bother about all those things? Birth is the beginning, death is the end. Whatever time is available for you, 60 years, 80 years, 100 years, just enjoy life. Life is meant for enjoyment. Don't read too much into all these shastras. And in fact, there was a philosophy even based on this Charvak, materialistic philosophy. Ranam Kritva Gritam Pivet. You borrow money and drink ghee also, like that it is said. Even for a person who believes that life is just meant for sensual pleasure and sensual enjoyment only, taking his stance, we are not recommending that, but even taking his stance, if you want to really do it and achieve it, even for that person, control is necessary. Why? Because uncontrollably, when you contact the sense objects, you tend to lose the pleasure out of it. This functions on the basis of diminishing marginal utility. We have studied this in economics, but it is very much applicable here also. When a person contacts a sense object, let us say mango season comes, when you taste the first mango, how much pleasure you have, it's phenomenal. It's really very good. But towards the end of the mango season, if you eat so much mangoes, you don't derive that pleasure at all. Why? It is the same mango, it is the same taste, and it is the same taste buds that you have, but why are you not able to enjoy? What has happened? Okay, even when person gives you sweet, it is so nice. The second sweet, if he gives, will definitely add to the pleasure, but the pleasure that you derive out of the second sweet will not be as much as the first sweet. It has already, the pleasure is diminished. Once the third sweet is given, the further deterioration of pleasure is there. Like that, it deteriorates and deteriorates further to such an extent that you will have so much of that sense object and you will contact it, yet derive no pleasure. You have reached a point of zero. Look at this chart. The x-axis represents the number of contacts that you have. Y-axis represents the joy content. And the first contact gives you high pleasure. The next further and subsequent contacts gives you lower and lower pleasure, till you reach a point where the red dot is, where you can say it is a point of neutralization. You can learn this term neutralization. Technically, sometimes it may be equivalent of what layman understands as addiction also. Neutralization is a point where you are forced to contact that sense object, knowing fully well that there is no pleasure in it. A person has a peck of alcohol, he gets a kick out of it. He keeps on drinking, he loses that pleasure. So he doubles the quantity of alcohol and to get the kick back. Then again, he continues like that indiscriminately and he loses the pleasure. Again, third. Like that, later he can have one full bottle of alcohol but not derive pleasure at all. Haven't you seen sometimes chain smokers, they just have two puff and then put off that cigarette. They don't even enjoy that cigarette which they wanted. When they started that habit of cigarette, probably they felt a pleasure. Ah, that was such a relief. But now he has become a chain smoker where he cannot live without cigarette, but that cigarette does not give him pleasure. It can happen with any sense contact. It need not be cigarette or alcohol. A person can be addicted to television serial. It was such a joy for us when we watched one day Chitrahar or one day movie when we were doing it in 80s or 90s with the waiting for that. But when there was lot of movies, lot of cricket matches, lot of things given, lot of serials are there, you are forced to watch serial daily as though you are addicted to it, but you do not derive pleasure out of it. Otherwise, how much pleasure that was derived in the earlier days? Our own experiences will tell you the contrast. Why is it so? Why is it that the pleasure diminishes? It is because when you are eating the first mango after a long gap, what has happened is the potential to enjoy that has reached its optimum. So if the dam is full, it is allowed to full, then you open the shutter, the gate, then the flow of the water is in full gush. So you close the gate and next day you open and you say that why is that no pressure at all? You must allow the dam to get full little more. Then only that same pressure will come. It is exactly like that. When you derive pleasure out of a cigarette, when you derive a pleasure out of talking to a friend, when you derive a pleasure out of eating a chocolate or watching a movie or watching a series, any pleasure at the sense level, if you do not discipline the contacts and maintain the distance, maintain the time gap, you are not having the full potential to experience and enjoy. Therefore, you are going to lose that pleasure. It will slowly diminish, but now it has become habituated to such an extent that it has become part of you. You are forced to contact just to avoid displeasure. So even afterwards, the contact will continue, but you will only derive zero pleasure out of it. So it works like this. Before neutralization, man plus X is pleasure. X can be anything, your object of pleasure. It could be a sweet, it could be your friend, it could be a phone call, it could be a television serial, whatever be your object of pleasure. You plus that was actually giving you pleasure. Upon neutralization, what happens is that you become along with that object, meaning that has added a weight to your personality. It becomes part and parcel of you. You are actually carrying that weight within you. Man becomes man plus X. After neutralization, man minus X is displeasure. If you deny the TV serial, there is happiness and unhappiness, displeasure. So just to maintain that status quo, you are forced to watch that serial, which is a lot of wastage of your time and energy, which you yourself know, but you have no choice but to go ahead and do it. So this is the definition of neutralization. Upon contact, there is no pleasure. When denied contact, there is displeasure. You are neutralized. We are neutralized to usage of our hands. Do we enjoy using our hands? But if hands are denied to us, we will not live without. No, I will give anything to get back my hands. We are using our eyes. Do you daily say, wow, today I am able to see? So nice. The sight is so nice. No, you take that eyesight for granted. If I'm going to deny you eyesight for the weekend, you will give anything and everything to get your eyesight back. So you are neutralized to eyesight. You are neutralized to oxygen. If oxygen is there, you don't enjoy, but without oxygen, you will sort of perish. Now, these are all natural things. I'm just giving it as to understand the concept, but it will be stupid on us to get external objects and get neutralized to it. And that is what is. So therefore, the formula here is, if you want to maintain that pleasure, you need to discipline your contacts. You need to wait for that potential. In fact, the ideal way is to go along the path based on your ideal or goal, spiritual goal. You proceed along that lines. Akasmat. So that may, therefore, somewhere from where the sense objects come and hit, you will be able to enjoy it better actually. In fact, that person will be able to enjoy better because he has pegged his happiness somewhere else. Along the way, if some sense contact is there along with him, he is okay to enjoy it. It is not that he's going to deny himself of that pleasure. He has the capacity. He has the taste. He knows how to enjoy. I can say a living proof at 94, Swamiji can still enjoy ice cream and mango. He can drive his car and enjoy. He can listen to music. So it is in your, our Upanishads also pray that you have all the senses and faculty functioning till the very end of life. All that is to be used for higher purposes. But once you do like that, they will be available for you to do their respective functions also. Otherwise, when doctors say after 40 you must not eat this, after 60 you must not eat this, then you will be having that lingering and taste within you, but you will not be able to contact it. So even if a person argues that life is meant for sensual pleasure and enjoyment, he needs to exercise this self-control. The self-control aspect of it is hinging upon the power of your intellect. So intellect has to develop. There's no other way. You have to do original thinking and develop your intellect so that you are able to have control over your mind and senses. But it is a long-term process. It is a sure process. It is a steady process, but you have to invest time on it. It is going to be a long-term process. And it's a matter of time before you even start enjoying that process also. So it is not that over a period of time you will suffer and suffer and suffer and someday only you will enjoy. Not like that. It is an initial phase where you need to allow yourself some sort of, with that Dhrida Vairagya, you need to have that thing that I will go through this, but it is a matter of time before you start enjoying the life in the fullest way. And then you will be able to have absolute control in whatever activities you will be doing. But to reach that state also, a formula is given. Formula means there is this book Swamiji has written called the Holocaust of Attachment. In this, a chapter is dedicated to what is known as middle path. This glorious middle path is what all the great masters suggest, even the scriptures suggest, Lord Buddha also suggests. Middle path is to not swing between the two extremes. At each and every level, there is this pairs of opposite from the world and we react to it. And at all the levels, we go into different extremes. So if you are able to consciously keep yourself in the middle path properly, the chances of even you gaining the knowledge and attaining self-control may be easier and faster. At the level of the wealth, majority of the people indulge in wealth and they think that the whole life is meant for only acquisition of wealth. Very minority, they consider wealth to be something that they need to despise and run away, and in the name of religion, completely abstain from wealth. You need to have a proper relationship with wealth. The formula is given by Shakespeare in Polonius' Advice. He says, "Costly thy habit as thy purse can buy. Expressed not in fancy. Rich, not gaudy." He says, you can be in a position where you are comfortable to do it, but be within your means. You can express it in a very nice way, rich, but not gaudy, not a vulgar display of wealth. Most of the time, it is due to peer pressure that we pitch ourselves in a position where we are not. You can be extremely, so that is the difference between being rich and being aristocratic. In other words, what is more important is to feel rich rather than be rich. So at the wealth, it is neither completely shunning wealth, neither completely indulging in wealth and going beyond your means. It is to maintain that middle path of having a comfortable life with whatever you have. Contentment is the key. At the level of the body, majority again do not take care of the body at all, and they indulge in all sorts of sensual activity, and ultimately the body becomes diseased and obese, and various problems come for their body. A minority become extremely obsessed with this body. They're constantly there into how much calories they eat, what is the diet, and what is the their consultations are only with the mirror and the weighing machine all the time. Their waist size, this, that, extremely body conscious. You need to be health conscious, not body conscious. The middle path is to understand body as a vehicle to carry out your experiences and do that repair properly. Maintain as much importance as you will give it to your car. Because as I said, Upanishad says, all the anga must be well and good. It must take you till the end of your life properly. Otherwise, with all your thoughts, if your body does not cooperate, it will be bad. So maintain that minimum exercises and everything. Body says, if you take care of me for half an hour daily, I'll take care of you for the 23.5 hours. What's the problem? So you need to maintain that body in as much good condition as possible. For anyway, disease, decay, or old age, all this is going to come. You have to accept it and go along. Do the best of your ability to keep it in best repair. Swami Ramatirtha says, the best service that you can do to others, to society, is to not fall sick actually. You are passing disease germs to others. So maintaining your body that way is a social cause, is your obligation. Maintain it for a purpose. Do not overtly become body conscious. At the level of senses, we have dealt with it. Some people completely abstain from sense. Minority, in the name of religion, they don't even have basic contacts of life. And that is extremely dangerous. Frustrated they become. And all are so-called religious people and other thing. It's like that. And the majority indulge in senses and they completely lose control, lose the joys of life also. So you need to maintain a balance in all sense contacts. Even Ayurveda talks about a middle path and maintaining proper contact at the level of your sleep, at the level of food, at the level of your sexual activity. Everything must be in the middle path. Emotions. Again, most of us are completely becoming emotional at the drop of the hat, and we tend to be guided by our emotions. To have emotions is a virtue, but to become emotional at all points of time is not a virtue. And a minority are completely indifferent. They don't have emotions at all. They don't react to anything at all. To have that passion and to have the direction of the passion with a proper intellectual guiding is the key. At the level of the intellect itself, majority don't read at all and they are just living by chance as it is. They become dumb. There is absolutely no thinking at all involved at all because there's no knowledge in them. Meaning, mechanically, they may go through certain studies and become literates, that's all. They are not educated in the proper way. And a minority, they tend to study and study and study and go into the length of study. So much books that they cover. It tends to result in confusion and arrogance, that's about all. Middle path is to take up something and go in depth. What counts here is the depth of study, not the length of the study. That also requires a lot of objectivity. And lastly, at the spiritual, religious level, one set of people in the name of religion just do completely rituals and go through it mechanically to one extreme. Other people completely shun the rituals and nothing, and they say philosophy, religion, some talking at the intellectual level. Middle path is to combine this both. One is the brain and another is the body. Both are required. You need to use that ritual properly to attain that goal, and then that ritual becomes profoundly impactful in you. It creates Chitta Shuddhi in you. So if you are able to balance yourself in middle path consciously, then developing the intellect and control of the senses, control of the mind becomes easy. So before we conclude, this is indicated in the chapter 6, 2 verses. Natyash natastu yogosti nachaikantam anashnataha nachati swapnashilasya jagrato naiva charjuna. Verily, yoga is not for him who eats too much or does not eat at all, nor for him who sleeps too much or keeps awake, O Arjuna. Yuktahara viharasya yukta cheshtasya karmasu yukta swapnavabodhasya yogo bhavati dukkha. To him who is regulated in eating and recreation, regulated in action, who is regulated in sleeping and waking, yoga becomes destroyer of sorrow. Thank you very much. No, Paramashri.
Thank you for that wonderful lecture, Ram Swamiji. So you mentioned about the middle path, walking in the middle path, and I could recall Upanishadic verse which says Kshurasya dhara nishita durgah pathastam kapayo vadanti. How difficult it is to walk on that middle path.
Right.
So how does one practice that? What are the prerequisites that one should have, and how does he make a continuity in life that walking in middle path becomes so natural to him?
Right. So, if I'm not mistaken, what you're quoting is from Kathopanishad, right?
Yes, it is from Kathopanishad.
Right. So, obviously, it is like a razor's edge. Finally, you can fall this side or that side. And unless a person becomes extremely talented, he cannot walk on that rope, isn't it? And then, but when we see that a person, when he is extremely practiced and talented, he dances on the ropes also, and nothing. And we are just looking at him in wonder. But for that to happen, I would say to begin with, we should not start practicing to walk on a rope. Our platform should be a little broader, actually. And that is where we start. And then as the path becomes narrower and sharper, based on our control on a bigger platform, then it will probably slide into the easier platform also. So when a person is probably at the level of karma, etc., obviously for him to do extreme sadhana, to keep the mind in meditation and extreme subtle dissection of the Upanishads and other thing is just not possible. For him to do, let's say, bulk of karma yoga and little bit of study and reflection to know about his mind, intellect, and to, let us say, for him to deny the sense contacts and control and all is also not recommended. So you can say that you can have a schedule or a timetable. Let's say I'll watch once a week movie or something like that. There cannot be a timetable given, but I'm saying you can formulate your timetable. Like that, if you are able to do, but then slowly, constantly focus on the sadhana aspect of it, then probably, that is why the Vedantic wisdom finally is given to a person who is Pariksha Lokana and Karmachitan, who has experienced life and who knows what life is all about. A person who has not experienced life, for you to say that what is there in money, man, what is there in sense contacts, he will not be able to relate. And if at that point he is going to rigorously practice that, he might turn out to be caricature also. So let him go through the Grihastha life, let him go through whatever life he is supposed to go through. And in a disciplined way, if he is able to enjoy life. So Artha and Kama are not illegitimate. They can be legitimately practiced. If he is able to do it in the proper way, then what happens is that he is able to parallelly get that taste out of it, and the chance to develop a Vairagya for them becomes easier. Then he is able to narrow the path and walk at a narrow path later on. So we need to be, probably with guidance, we need to start with a broad spectrum and then go to the razor's edge. Yeah.
Okay. And when you mentioned about sadhana, is it contemplating on the self itself, or how does it? How does one should take it up?
Essentially, it is contemplating on the self. But to do it, we have been given various practices. Let's say karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga. We need to deal with the quantum of our desires first to do a lot of actions, then involve ourselves in even extroverted bhakti, and then a little bit of study, reflection, all those things. So even karma, bhakti, jnana at a higher level is of more absorbing and introverted nature. To reach to that, since we are now more expressive and more active, karma yoga is the way. So neha vikramana shasti pratyavayo na vidyate. Therefore, you need to happily indulge, or when I say in karma yoga, and do a little bit of jnana and this thing. Later, as you become introverted, the other things will take precedence. So at our level, we can say whatever inspires us to do now, with dedicating to a higher cause, if we do, that becomes our sadhana.
Okay, thank you. We have a question. They say a guru is required to help us control our senses and lead us in the righteous path. They also say when the student is ready, the guru appears. How does one become ready for that?
Chapter 4, verse 34 gives the formula as to how the Shishya becomes, student becomes ready. Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena seveya. So, according to again the law of demand and supply, this works. That moment you are prepared, the guru comes and knocks at the door, literally, like that it is given. So, tad vidhi pranipatena, at the mind level, we are completely surrendered to the source of knowledge, the guru. So that I do not know and I need to seek, that attitude of the mind to surrender must be there. Pranipatena is representative of that. Pariprashnena, that does not mean that I lose the faculty of thinking. I intake the knowledge, but with reverence, I do question him also. Sir, how are you saying that? Please explain to me. This sort of attitude and readiness of the intellect is also there. And then Sevaya, the physical level, I am ready to serve him or his cause to the best of my ability, because unless otherwise I show that attitude of gratitude to him, absorption of knowledge is not going to be there. So if a person is able to prepare himself at all the three levels like this, Guru should appear in his vicinity is the formula given.
Yeah. And there is a question about addiction. How does one wane away a young person addicted to mobile phones?
Why do you want to be mobile? It's like as it is. See, the point is, as I said, he, just as in our times, maybe when you are young, the mobile phone was not there. You were addicted to transistor or something like that. Or in the grandfather generation, they might have been gone to theater or something. Sometimes the addiction was not there due to the circumstances that was forced. But now, of course, I'm not denying the legitimacy of this question, because the lifestyle has changed so much that the whole world infiltrates us through the mobile phone, etc. And it is like that. Now, you cannot take the toy away from the child. It is just not possible. It is like a different toy that we are all playing with. All of us. When I say, not just the youth, somebody is addicted to TV, somebody is addicted to, and mobile phone is now one device which has it all. It has the phone, it has the TV, it has the internet, it has the connection, everything like that. So when the whole world comes to you, you are addicted to the world in a way through the mobile phone. Now, again and again, it is to understand or educate that person when he is available, to talk about, see, unless otherwise you give him a higher taste or higher joy somewhere else, he is not going to be de-addicted from this. So for that, you need to expose him to higher things in life, for which the parents and teachers must follow. That is the key. See, we are always wanting to reform the world and reform this in the other persons. But unless otherwise, the double fault that the parents do is that they do not follow. They follow an indisciplined life and they give lectures to the youngsters. It will never work. When you follow the path yourself, you become a role model for them to even if he seems deviated in his teenage and other thing, there is a strong foundation for him to come back actually. So therefore, you need to invest on a greater equipment, which is your intellect. Unless otherwise he knows the joy of using the intellect, which is a finer equipment than the mobile, why will he leave it? It is just not possible as it is.
I think you made a very important point, that invest in the intellect. It is really important for the generation of ours. And you beautifully quoted Tadvidhi Pranipatena. And it also says at the end of the verse, Jnaninaha Tattvadarshinaha, to whom one should approach and pariprashnena.
In fact, sorry.
Yeah, please.
No, that verse talks about the qualities of ideal student and the ideal teacher also. So, an ideal teacher is one who is a jnani and a tattvadarshi. In the Mundaka also it comes Parikshalotan Lokan Karmachitan Brahmano Nirveda Maya Nastya Kritakritena Tadvijnanartam Saburumeva Vigachet Samitpani Shrotriyam Brahmanishtam. So Shrotriya and Brahmanishta is given there. Jnani and Tattvadarshi is given here. Both are referring to the same. An ideal teacher is one who is able to quote the Shastras. Even though he is an embodiment of knowledge, he takes Shastra as the Pramana and he is able to have the technique of right teaching, knowing the student from his level. Not, but just not he mechanically quotes the Shastras. He's not a philosophy teacher. He is also a Tattvadarshi. He has that Anubhuti. So whatever he speaks comes from the depth of his experience. And that makes a profound impact. So the teacher also has these two qualities, ideal teacher.
Yeah, that was my question. How does a seeker knows a guru is Tattvadarshi? Yeah. And we have a question. I think we can take it up and we might conclude the session.
Okay.
How does one move from Manda Vairagya to Madhyama Vairagya and eventually a Tivra Vairagya?
Okay. See, the thing is, Vairagya are the quality of dispassion, which is probably to say no when you want to say no. So the intellect has basically two functions here, or two ways, two aspects of it we can look at it. One is to understand what is right and wrong. Another is to hold on to what is right and reject what is wrong. That becomes little more difficult. With little bit of experience, without even getting the guidance of the guru or a Bhagavad Gita, we might know what is right and what is wrong. We all know we should get up early and do exercises. We don't need a Bhagavad Gita to tell this or a guru to tell this. We know it. But it really doesn't happen. At that point of time, the mind takes over and the intellect helplessly watches. That's all it is. So that is why even in the Sadhana Chatushtayam, Viveka is always followed by Vairagya. And what is the use of all this Vedanta and other lectures if you are not able to internalize it with some Vairagya? So they say Jnana and Vairagya should go together. Otherwise, that Jnana just remains here as a bulk knowledge and you become this heavy upon you. It will not get digested. So for you to go from one level of Vairagya to the other, I think the prompt will be there internally only. See, like I would say, in the company, they give targets for the salesperson. Okay, within this year you should do this much, etc. And there are productivity related bonus and other things that is also given. Suppose if the target is a million rupees of sales that he needs to make, and within March he should make, but in January only he is nearing that completion. That will not make the company relax. They will say they will increase the target slightly to a little more, and that they'll make them work more, boost more. Like that it is. Exactly like that. When you are able to keep a relative target and you are working towards it, as you are able to feel comfortable at that level, when the mind knows at this level it is comfortable for it. Earlier, you need to put in the effort to reach that level, but now the mind is comfortable at that level. Then you need to consciously raise the bar. Ultimate status as ideal self-realization or fine, but along that lines you can have specific targets even in the world for you to achieve, but in the line where this push is always there, because when that relaxation of the effort is there, the mind can get stagnated at any level. Okay, you have come from LKG to 5th standard, but you should not stop at 5th standard, you go further. But 10th standard you don't stop, go further. PhD, finally, till whatever is the finality, you have to go. So consciously, when you are feeling comfortable at certain level, when it comes naturally and easily, where conscious effort is not required, probably you need to review and raise the bar at that point of time. So by keeping it, then harder Vairagya is required at that point of time.
And also there is a Shastra Vakya about Vairagya, that is Yadaharam Virajet, Tadaharam Pravrajet. So whenever you are into Vairagya, you just you become the Pravraja. So this gives you to a question that are there different levels in Vairagya also? Because it says when you are Vairagya, it is complete Vairagya. There is no levels.
So, right. See, the point is when the Sadhana Chatushtayam is also discussed, we do talk about all the qualities that are given there at two levels. See, for a person who is initially getting into the spiritual path also, all these are applicable. But a person who is advanced in the spiritual path also applicable. Let us take, for example, the quality of Shraddha. The faith which a person enters the spiritual path, he has the faith in the master, he has faith in the Shastras, and he has a lot of doubts now, he is going to get it clarified. So the faith operates, Shraddha operates at one level there. Later, he is convinced about all the Shastras. He has no doubt about it. He is convinced about the scientific explanation. He is convinced about the existence of God or whatever is the self and realization that he needs to go. But still, he is not able to achieve it. What else can I do? You know, this sort of a question mark comes. And at that point of time, to have a Shraddha at a different level is important. Like, and at that time, maybe like Hanuman will come and give a Chudamani or something like that. You know, it will happen. Sadguru will be there at that point of, but the level at which Shraddha is operating for a high level seeker and a low level seeker is different. Exactly like that, we can say. We just studied 3-year course at academy. You can say it is like a temporary sannyas. It is not that you may feel at some point of time you are a Vivekananda, Ramjita, but 3 years is just a foundation, just to create the basic foundation. You have a lifetime for you to apply this and achieve results, right? But we have got a taste of it. But for you to achieve it, and you have to go along the path now, hard plowing way, doing karma yoga and other thing. Maybe when you reach a real level of renunciation, that vairagya that you practice there is completely different. Where you are even not even wanting to, not just you have a phone call and you don't want to attend the phone call. The phone doesn't exist in your circumstance itself. In your environment, it doesn't exist. That is a different level altogether.
Yeah, correct. Thank you so much, Ramaswamy, for these wonderful insights and nuggets. Viewers, tomorrow again at the same time at 9 o'clock in the morning, at 6 o'clock in the evening, Ramaswamy will be continuing the sessions. Please tune into our Zoom, tune into our website to register. Thank you so much. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha.